This is Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony on FM 92.7 and AM 1400. The Answer.
Good morning, Detroit. Detroit's Morning Answer with John Anthony. If you missed that first hour, head over to theanswerdetroit.com. That's theanswerdetroit.com. Download the show. You can listen to it no matter where you are. You know, we've talked a lot about what we see happening in Venezuela. We talked about how we also believe that China is enemy number one as it relates to America. Today, we're joined by a man who deeply understands the story beneath the headlines. When I had the opportunity, when I saw that his name came across, I said, we definitely got to get him in. James Bradley is not just a best-selling historian. He is someone who has spent his career mapping the way nations see themselves. His books, Flags of Our Fathers, Flyboys, The Imperial Cruise, The China Mirage, and most recently, Precious Freedom, based on 10 years living in Vietnam, show how power, memory, and national identity shape wars long before the first shot is fired. Right now, everyone is watching the Pacific, not specific. I got a friend that says that. But the real chessboard might be unfolding closer to home, across Latin America and the Western Hemisphere, where China is building influence, alliances, and an infrastructure that could reshape our strategic future. James Bradley is uniquely positioned to help us understand this moment. James, welcome to Detroit's Morning Answer.
Hey, John. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you know, I have to say now, I'm going to do my best not to fanboy because I love your writings. I think you are probably one of the best people who can articulate and paint a picture in your mind, and you truly get and understand what is happening across this world right now. So I appreciate you being here.
Well, good to be. You know, you said in an interview that the biggest subject is fighting for the truth, and I think it all started with Vietnam.
Yeah. Now, James, across your body of work, you show America consistently misreading other civilizations. What is, in your opinion, what is the core misunderstanding shaping the U.S. policy toward China today?
Well, you know, I went to school in Japan. I wrote Flags of Our Fathers about my father on Iwo Jima. And now I've written, the book we're talking about is Precious Freedom after 10 years in Vietnam. And John, to tell you the truth, I went to Vietnam to wrap up a book in 3 years. But because of all the propaganda that I had been marinated in, from Walter Cronkite all the way up to Ken Burns, it took me 10 years to get my head on straight and see what really happened.
Yeah.
So the problem is you're in Detroit. So if I moved someone up from New Orleans to run Detroit, and I moved a lifelong Detroit person down to New Orleans, you guys probably wouldn't agree. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when you're moving them, and we're not moving Vietnamese to Chicago to expect Chicago to run like Vietnam, but we sent Americans, including my older brother, to Vietnam, and they didn't speak the language. They had rifles, and then, you know, the civilization's supposed to change. And I think it's based on this false thing of World War II. When my dad went to Iwo Jima, it was about mowing the lawn, just pushing the Japanese, just killing everybody on an island. But with Vietnam, we went in, and we had 60 million enemies. Every woman, every grandmother, the grandmothers were the intelligence net. So the Marines were walking. I mean, the Oliver Stone, former vet of Vietnam and the filmmaker, says on the back of my book, Precious Freedom, if we had known what James Bradley reveals back in the 60s, what actually happened in the 60s in Vietnam, American mothers would not have sent their children to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Wow.
And that's the truth. This is, John, what's extraordinary, I went to where the Marines were in Vietnam, and they got pushed out, not in 1975, like we think with the fall of Saigon, but they got pushed out in 1969.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just a minute. There was no North Vietnamese army fighting the Marines at that point. It was all civilians.
Wow.
John, the story here is that teenagers who were trained in People's War pushed the United States Marines out of Vietnam in 1969. So they had a plan, and we're still not examining what, I've been to Afghanistan. The idea that anyone's going to go to Afghanistan and get the Afghanis to change their ways, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we have not won a war since 1945, John.
Yeah.
Our military has not had a victory in 80 years. So it's time, we're coming up with the Veterans Day, and I wrote this for veterans that with this book, Precious Freedom, they finally understand what really happened in Vietnam.
Wow. James, your main character in this book, he faces choices where every option costs something. What does the book suggest about the idea that freedom is never free? Well,
the name of the book is Precious Freedom because Uncle Ho Chi Minh, told his people, I know you're suffering, but nothing's more precious than freedom. So I had so many Vietnamese tell me, the Americans killed my mother, they tortured my sister, they killed my dad, but Uncle Ho said nothing. So in other words, the Americans didn't know what they were fighting for. We're fighting against communism, we're fighting for democracy, we're fighting to keep China, the domino theory, we're fighting. We had 1,000 reasons we were fighting. And Uncle Ho said, you have only one reason to fight, and that's for freedom. So if you understand the Revolutionary War and the civilians walking with bloody feet at Valley Forge, you understand how Vietnam beat the Marines in 1969.
That's a true point. But, as I was reading some of the excerpts about your book, loyalty becomes, in this book, I believe, a virtue and a trap. How do you think nations, movements, and even families use loyalty as a form of control?
Well, we were loyal to the wrong thing. I want to say that the Vietnamese who pushed the Marines out, they admired the Marines as individual fighters. The 18, 19, 20-year-old Marines were all-time great. They did their job. The problem was the leadership. We didn't have a focus. We went into Vietnam on a lie, and we didn't know why we were fighting. And that's what Uncle Ho told his people. He said, don't hate the Americans. They're a victim of their government.
Wow.
John, if you go to Vietnam tomorrow, you're the most popular foreigner. You're an American. They love Americans. And I said, why? They killed your parents and grandparents. And they said, no. Uncle Ho told us not to hate the Americans because the soldiers are being taken advantage of by their government and they're victims just like us. So that's this book, Precious Freedom, that took me 10 years. It's the opposite of what Ken Burns and Walter Cronkite have told us all these years. And it's about time that the vets, our brave vets who fought, they did a great job. The problem was that our leaders didn't have a strategy, and we shouldn't have gone in. We didn't want one day of that Vietnam War, John. That's a myth. The argument, we say, how did we lose? No. We didn't win one day. Every single day at 4 p.m., the Marines had to retreat and dig a hole. They couldn't hold territory for 24 hours.
Wow.
And then I said to the Vietnamese, I said, well, what's the story here? And they said, we were sleeping during the day. They said, we didn't fight during the day. The Americans were too strong. I said, what? And they said, you looked at all these documentaries about the Vietnam War, Mr. Bradley. You need night goggles to see us fighting. We weren't out in the day because you had airplanes. You had eyes in the sky. Uncle Ho said, sleep during the day, and then the Americans retreat at night, and you can control, like John, your backyard. Like when you're 15 years old, you know your backyard, your neighborhood.
Yes.
Well, these were teenagers They knew every crevice and hill and rock and everything. And the Marines came in bunches. And the Vietnamese attacked. It was like, John, you, me, and Joe and 2 other guys, 5 guys, we'll just nick this last Marine and then we'll run away. Well, that's all they did. It was hit and run.
Yeah.
We think that was like disorganized. No. It was called People's War. And they had a strategy. And Uncle Ho said, we'll just harass them enough. They won't be able to win. And then the home front will give up.
Yeah.
And that's what happened.
It sounds like Iraq and Afghanistan, too. That was part of their strategy as well. But, I as I'm looking at this U.S.-China rivalry, so many people are focusing just on the Pacific issue. Why is the real front line now in Latin America? China is securing ports, telecom systems, mines, and there's a lot of energy infrastructure in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. Are we looking at a modern version of the Cuban Missile Crisis?
I think we're looking at what President Eisenhower, 5-star general, said. He said, watch out, or the military-industrial complex will get into the city halls, it'll control the media, and you've got to watch it. We're going wild all over the place. I would ask Americans, go to Shanghai, Beijing, Ho Chi Minh City, and Taipei. My daughter lives in Taipei. I lived in Ho Chi Minh City. There is no girl in a miniskirt who's afraid to walk around at midnight in Taipei, Ho Chi Minh, or Beijing. It's safe. They don't have these problems that we do. The Chongqing, China, there's 30 million people in that city. They just built the world's largest train station. It's bigger than any airport in the United States. They're going 300-400 kilometers an hour on super trains, and we have Amtrak falling off the track. John, we have an airline system that isn't working. So I ask Americans, where's the quality of life? It's not this the fact that we have airplanes that can take off on aircraft carriers. Well, when Trump was on that aircraft carrier, he wasn't out near the Yemen, near the Houthis, because the Houthis could sink an aircraft carrier with a lawnmower drone. We're looking at yesterday's mechanics. Are we going to invade Venezuela and secure it and go into the oil wells? That's not going to happen.
No.
Venezuela's as big as France and Germany combined.
Yeah.
It took us months to get across France. So I'm just saying to America, George Washington, a general, said in his farewell address, don't get involved with these foreign countries. General Eisenhower took 3 years to do his farewell address, and he said, don't get involved. Don't spend all your money on the military. And so I would just ask Americans, look at the quality of life in China, in Taiwan, where I've been. It is gleaming city. Why isn't Chicago and Detroit? How come you don't have 400K an hour trains connecting? How come you can't get downtown Chicago in like 30 minutes from Detroit in beautiful, gleaming, whatever, and no no thievery on the street? So I mean, I'm America first. I'm General Eisenhower and General Washington. Vietnam War cost a fortune, and it was just strategically wrong.
Well,
China is not going to invade San Francisco.
Yeah. Well, you talked about why can't Chicago and Detroit? Not so much Detroit's mayor, but Chicago's mayor is a very progressive socialist ideology. And you look at what New York just did in Mondani. James Bradley, do you ever think that you would see a day where the ideology that we fought and lost so many brave men and women would be leading a lot of our cities? Did you ever think that day would come?
I didn't, I haven't lived in the States for 10 years, but let's take Mondani out and the Chicago mayor, and, let's say they didn't get elected. Let's take the politics out of it. Look at on the ground, the quality of life. You should be able to get on a train and go super to LA in hours. We don't have an airline system that's working. Even if you go past the shutdown, we spent trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, John.
Yeah.
There's none of our generals went to jail over that.
Yeah. No.
We had American kids die, and nobody was jailed for Iraq and Afghanistan. But somebody made a lot of money.
That is the truth. Now, your book, Precious Freedom, I feel like there's a deep spiritual undercurrent in there. What role does faith play in surviving ideology, and how did the Vietnamese people do it? What role does faith play in surviving this ideology, this violence, and this identity loss? What were some of the things they told you about that aspect?
There's two main characters. Chip is the 19-year-old Marine, and he kills a girl's father, May's father. And at that point, in 1967, they both had faith. Chip had faith in his government and in the Marines. May had faith in Vietnam and Uncle Ho. The difference was there was nothing there to have faith in for the Americans. And he eventually, comes to a difficult end, not because he was killed in Vietnam, but because it's called moral injury. When I believe in you, John, and then it turns out that you were a fraud,
yeah.
I feel betrayed. And we let the Marines into Vietnam for fraudulent reasons, and our vets were betrayed. They did a great job, but the leaders, they had strong faith, our Marines, but it turned out that it was faith in nothing, like cotton candy. Whereas the Vietnamese, they were fighting for something called freedom. Precious Freedom is the name of the book. Ho Chi Minh said nothing is more precious than freedom.
Do you see that same misleading when you look at now we're going to turn weapons onto Venezuela? We just bombed Iran. Do you see that same misleading, or is this, you think, something that should be done as it relates to keeping Iran at bay and making sure Venezuela doesn't, China and Russia and those actors don't come in and take advantage of those people?
Well, I lived in Iran. The Iranians saved my life. Iran hasn't invaded anybody. Venezuela is not invading us.
But haven't they paid for it? October 7th, they were the biggest payees of what happened on October 7th in Israel.
But so what? Why? You and I are Americans, and we feel we have. Should people from Chile say, well, the mayor of Chicago is no good, we'll invade America? The people of Japan will say, this Los Angeles mayor, they burnt down the Palisades, and we're going to invade. We're going to send the Japanese military into California to save California. We don't allow other people to. So let Venezuela work out their situation. Israel, let them work it out. Good luck to you. But what I'm saying is, we have proven 80 years of dumping money overseas has lowered the standard of living in America. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm not saying right or wrong, Venezuela, China, Iran, whatever, but they're not invading us.
Yeah.
We have the Pacific. We have the Atlantic. I don't think China's going to come to San Francisco and Iran's going to come to New York. Don't worry about it.
No, James.
But I'm worried about Detroit and Chicago.
Yeah. Hey, James Bradley, they don't have to do that because they're doing it, using it through our media system, and they're dumbing us down in education. So they probably wouldn't have to fire a shot. We're doing it to ourselves, James.
Okay, but then an aircraft carrier is not going to help that.
Yeah.
I agree that we should have better education. I agree that we should clean up the media. But aircraft carriers, John, I've been on 3 aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
This is like, okay, let's say there's 5,000 hamburgers a day being fed to the kids in the aircraft carrier. We're borrowing like the money to pay for like 4,000 of those hamburgers. Yeah. We can't even afford the missiles that we're firing. We're borrowing. We're broke.
Yes, we are.
We've got to wake up. We can't afford this stuff. And you know where President Eisenhower spent a lot of his career?
Where?
On the Mexican border. George Patton spent his career on the Mexican border. We used to have a military that took care of America. And then after 9/11, the military said, no, we're not the Department of Defense. We're the Department of Offense. We don't defend America.
James, we got about a minute and 30, but I want to pose this one last question, and also tell the people where to get your book. But you've spent decades studying power, conflict, myth, and memory. What questions should the American people be asking right now that we are not asking?
What's my quality of life? Instead of, have you been to Venezuela? I've never been to Venezuela.
I've never been there.
And okay, I'm from Wisconsin, and Venezuela's not invading Wisconsin.
Yeah.
But if I try to get from, Wisconsin to Detroit, which I've driven in the past, it's still a bunch of potholed roads, and there's some crime. There's no bridge over Lake Michigan. There's no super tunnel going underneath Lake Michigan. We're going into the Flintstone era. So I would say to Americans, do what I did. Go to Vietnam. Go look at it. Ho Chi Minh City, they're growing Vietnam's growing 8% a year. There is safe streets. We could have this successful country that I grew up with. But the book is Precious Freedom. It comes out tomorrow. You can get it anywhere. And as Oliver Stone says on the back cover, if we knew what James Bradley reveals in this book, we would not have sent our children to Iraq and Afghanistan.
Wow.
So the message is in the book. It's got great characters. I base a family in Minnesota, and based on my mom and dad.
Wow.
And they send their son Chip to Vietnam. So half of the book is about the American look. And I got to say, John, two of the heroes in this book, there are some guys you might have heard of. One's called Dr. Martin Luther King.
Oh, yeah.
Who stood up and said, we have to stop this madness. And then he got a bullet in the head 1 year to that day that he condemned Vietnam.
Yeah.
And the other guy is a guy named Muhammad Ali.
Oh, yeah.
They wanted to put him in jail because he said, I don't want to go kill brown people when you don't let the black people right here be free.
Wow.
So when you say, what do I want America to do? Why don't we listen to Muhammad Ali? He said, I don't want to go overseas and fight.
Yeah.
I want freedom right here, right here
James,
in Memphis.
I love it. James Bradley, we got to leave it right there. Thanks so much for joining us on Detroit's Morning Answer. Thank you so much, James Bradley. We'll be right back.